Hello, good evening, welcome again. I'm glad you could join me on this fine Friday night. My name's Aaron Bastani. This is Novara Media's live coverage and reaction to the BBC Question Time election special. I can't wait. You know why? We have a real conflict of politics here tonight to watch. We have on the one hand, in the blue corner, UK's Nigel Farage, Reform UK's Nigel Farage rather. And in the red corner, maybe the green red corner, the Green Party's co-leader, Adrian Ramsay. They'll be facing a Question Time studio audience. Sadly, they won't be on the platform together. I think that would have been great TV. A bit like what we saw with Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer on Wednesday. I think Adrian Ramsay or Carla Denyer and Nigel Farage would have been great. On the one hand, somebody who wants zero migration. On the other hand, somebody who wants broadly porous borders, single market, rejoin the EU, public ownership of rail, mail, and water. And actually, to be fair, Reform actually have quite a radical policy on that too, but on most things, they are miles apart. My expectations are, I don't know really, most of this over the next hour, I think, will be quite defensive. The format means parties are on the defense. I think that's going to make really interesting TV with Nigel Farage. Him having to defend himself, not from quote-unquote elite London journalists, but from the public, maybe a format which is quite a sticky wicket for the Reform UK leader. For Adrian Ramsay, I think this is really useful for him, having a national political media moment, because of course he's trying to win that constituency of Waveney Valley. It's very close. People I've spoken to on the ground there think that he will either win or come a very close second. The problem, of course, in polling for it is that it's a Tory seat. And many Tory voters say, I won't be turning up. And if they're all being honest, then he will win. But of course, as we know, shy Tories in a general election, well, they are a thing. I think this debate is getting ready to go. Let me know what you think on the YouTube Super Chat, and we'll see if we can get that up on the screen as the debate continues. Of course, quickly, we are funded by our audience here at Novara Media. If you want to be part of that, building a people-powered media, a new media for different politics, go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. Finally, this is the final debate, but probably the biggest chance these two parties will have to make an impact between now and July the 4th, particularly for Reform. This could come at quite a difficult moment. Of course, Farage and Reform UK embroiled in a scandal right now with regards to comments caught on camera by Channel 4 News. We have a little bit longer than I thought. This is the outro of whatever was on the BBC beforehand. Fortunately, there are no adverts on the BBC. So we'll go to there quite soon. Let me know what you think as well with regards to the GE campaign, the general election campaign so far. Has it impressed you? How do you think Sunak and Stum have done? Something really strange is going on, in so much as the campaign, the media coverage has been quite, dull and calm and tranquil. And then earlier on today, well, actually it's about half an hour ago, I saw a poll that put the Tories out on three seats, lower than the Greens, the same as Plaid Cymru. So something strange is happening. Either the media sort of conversation isn't matching the reality on the ground, or those polls are very, very badly wrong. We're going to go to that in one moment, and let me know what you think using those super chats. I read all the comments. Can you believe it? I'm a bit of a masochist like that. Here we go.
The leaders of the country's four largest parties got the Question Time treatment. Tonight, with our audience here in Birmingham, it's time to test the ideas of Adrian Ramsay of the Green Party of England and Wales and Nigel Farage of Reform UK. Each of our two guests will face 30 minutes of questions from our audience, who represent a mix of political sentiment, including many who are still making up their mind, and supporters of both the Greens and Reform. First up is the co-leader of the Green Party, Adrian Ramsay, and after half an hour it will be the turn of Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. And as always, you can join in what will no doubt be lively conversations on social media. So, let's get going, shall we? Please welcome our first guest, Adrian Ramsay.
Of course, Adrian Ramsay is first because Farage is the real TV deal. But this is great for the Greens, having somebody speaking to an audience for half an hour.
Adrian Ramsay, the rules for you, as they will be for Nigel Farage, of course, quite simple. You won't be interrupted if you keep your answers reasonably brief, to the point, and actually answer the question. That's what you're here for. Obviously, my job is to make sure that you do. OK, let's take our first question, please, from Graham Wallin.
Good evening. What would we have to sacrifice to meet your pledges?
Hello, Graham, and good evening, everybody. I think this is a great question, Graham, because we need to achieve big changes in our society. We have an NHS which is severely overstretched, a social care system where people can't get access to the personal care they need. Our schools are crumbling, and we have a climate crisis and a nature crisis where we've got sewage in our rivers and climate going unchecked. So the Green Party is putting forward an ambitious manifesto for this election where we can offer real hope and real change on the biggest issues of our time. And that's about offering a vision for a different type of society. So in terms of what would people be sacrificing, well, I think it's about what people would be gaining, because at the moment, people can't get access to an NHS dentist. Where I am in East Anglia, there's not a single NHS dentist in Norfolk and Waveney taking new patients. People can't get access to a GP when they need one. The hospitals are full of patients in corridors, and we have a climate and nature crisis that we're not getting to grips with. So what we're arguing is that we should put in the investment and ask the very richest in society, multimillionaires and billionaires, to put in modestly more so that we can have a society where people can get the services they need when they need one. We can have a clean environment, because people say to me all the time they're thinking about what the future's going to be like for their children and for their grandchildren. And I think we all know that we need to step up action on the climate crisis, both to adapt to the changes that are already happening, but to avoid the runaway climate change that will affect us all dreadfully if we don't get to grips with this.
Well, should we talk about some of the specifics? Because Graham's question is, what would we have to sacrifice to meet your pledges? So let's talk about cars, for example. Because obviously you would like us all to drive, all of us here, to drive electric cars. And what you're suggesting is that everyone has to
so is the government. It's just about timing.
Petrol and diesel cars.
So is the government.
By 2035. That's tens of millions of cars. That's potentially the cars of lots of the people sitting here. How are you going to recompense people for doing that?
Well, that's a good question, Fiona, and there does need to be...
I'm sure you'd like an answer.
There needs to be
electric cars, by the way, by 2035 will be cheaper than petrol cars. But anyway.
Fossil fuel vehicles. And of course...
And have you costed for that? And how much would people expect to get?
Our manifesto is fully costed. And what I would say is that as part of a plan to say we have a date where no new fossil fuel vehicles come onto the road, of course, from then on, there'll still be lots of second-hand fossil fuel vehicles that people may buy. But what it will do is it will support the electric vehicle manufacturers
so just to
install infrastructure and make it easier for people to use.
Just
grow up.
So what exactly are you suggesting? That we'll have to scrap our petrol and diesel cars by 2035?
No.
I think that's what you're saying.
We want to have no petrol and diesel cars on the road by then.
So given that you're saying it's
in place as well,
well, that's what I'm wondering. So given that it's fully costed, you there in your black and white shirt, let's say you've got a petrol and diesel car. How much would you... What's your name?
Ryan.
Ryan, how much would you pay him for his petrol and diesel car?
I'm not sure I have that specific figure.
But then how do you know it's fully costed?
Well, because I can tell you about what the figures for our manifesto as a whole are seeking to achieve in terms of the transition to net zero. And one of the big parts of that is we've got to invest in our public transport system, because we have some of the most expensive trains and public transport in the UK, if you can get onto public transport at all. There are so many villages where I am in East Anglia where people no longer have a bus at all. So you've got to put the investment into improving the public transport before you start bringing in the measures around helping people move away from their cars or other measures that would eventually help that transition.
So far.
So should we talk about the public transport
plan?
So let's talk about the public transport. So you want to introduce a frequent flyer ban, a levy, and ban domestic flights that would take less than 3 hours by train.
Good.
So say, for example, you're coming from Manchester to London by train. It's actually more expensive on certain flights, quite a lot more expensive, to come by train than it is to fly. So again, I mean, just coming back to Mark's question in terms of what it might cost people, what would you do about that?
I think that's a really good
Squeeze
question,
middle who get
because
flights from
it
Manchester to
absolutely
London.
shouldn't be the
That's
case
your lot,
that
Fiona.
It's more expensive to get the train, often substantially more expensive, isn't it, to get the train within the UK than it is to get a flight. And the flight is several times more environmentally damaging. And I think most people want to do the greener option, but the greener option's got to be the cheaper and more convenient option as well.
So how would you make it cheaper?
Well,
that's
at the
what I'm
moment, there are
wondering,
huge subsidies that go into the aviation industry, whilst we have some of the most expensive rail prices in Europe. And so one of the things we would do is to bring the railways back into public ownership, which I think people would really like to see, to ensure that they are run for public benefit, not for the huge profits of the rail companies.
So, Mark, you had your hand up again. What would you like to say? Are you convinced by what you're hearing? Are you convinced by what you're hearing?
I don't understand. I thought the Green Party were against HS2 and schemes like that, which is improving high-speed rail, so why were they against it?
So we want to see far more investment in public transport and in particular in improving regional and local connections here in the Midlands, in the north, in all parts of the country. We did have concerns about the huge cost and also the local environmental impact along the London to Birmingham route of the particular proposal for HS2. But that route's happening now, and what the government said is it's going to scrap the perhaps more helpful leg of HS2, which was going to be in the Midlands and in the north, and it said it'll put that money into regional and local transport networks for the Midlands, for the north, for the whole of the country, all of our regions. I'm in a region in East Anglia which is underinvested. I think probably you in the Midlands and in the north, Phil, your public transport's not been invested in. And my question to the government would be, it said it was going to invest that HS2 second leg money in local transport. Where's that happening? Have you seen the improvements to public transport where you are? I know I haven't. So we need to get that investment into local and regional rail services, into improving bus services, so that people do have that option for public transport wherever that's practical.
There's quite a few hands up. Let's get round to some of you. The woman there in the...
Hello.
Hi there.
Just going back to your comments about us all scrapping our petrol and diesel cars and having electric vehicles, what are you going to do to actually put in place the infrastructure across the whole of the UK to support that?
Yeah, absolutely. What's your name, sorry?
Great question, by the way.
Williams.
Dee, thank you for
Great
your
question, because
Dee.
authorities
I think that's an
aren't-
absolutely
they're not
crucial
bothering to put
question.
charging stations in
I've
anywhere.
been asked a gotcha question from interviewers in this election about, do I have a car? And I do own a car, which I use when I need to. It's a hybrid car. I would have got an electric car, but the house that I lived in when I got it was a terraced house where there was no charging points. And I'm sure lots of people will face barriers like that, or financial barriers. You might want to get an electric car.
Nice job, Adrian.
Expensive, or you're worried about the infrastructure. So that's got to have the investment, both from government, but also the reason why I think we do need to have a clear timeline for moving all of our vehicles to electric and away from fossil fuels is that gives the private sector a clear timescale to work to for putting that investment in. And when the government changed the goalposts that the Conservative government actually had itself in place for moving away from fossil fuel vehicles, they pulled the rug away from the electric vehicle sector, as they did from the renewable energy sector, when they were all geared up for putting that investment in. So if we're going to get the business opportunities and work closely with business to make these changes, we have to give them the confidence that they have on the timescales that are there. And it's really odd to me that a Conservative government would be so anti-business as to pull the rug away and also be talking down the UK so much when we could be playing a lead in this green transition to a greener future. People say to me all the time, what can the UK do on climate change given what China's emitting? Well, what we can do is what we've done in the past. We can be patriotic. We can say, we are going to lead the world into the green industrial revolution of the future with all the jobs that will bring, the bills it will bring down, and it will create a better society as well.
Adrian, let's take another question, because that sort of leads into another. Derek Chapman, whereabouts are you sitting? Yeah. There you go.
Good evening. It's lovely to have your green vision, but what I would like to know is how are you going to get countries like China and India to go green?
So just to put that in context, so China accounts for something like 30% of global emissions. India's about 60%.
It makes all our stuff.
We're about 1%.
It's got 1.4 billion people. China is a global leader in electric vehicles, solar cells, wind, storage.
It is a question that's often raised. And of course, climate is a global issue, and the UK government needs to play a global role in advocating for the changes that are needed, but also in leading by example. Because what we do here in the UK does still have an impact internationally. We shouldn't talk ourselves down in that respect. And also the changes that we need to make for the UK will benefit us regardless of what other countries do.
But specifically the question is about how we're going to persuade China and India.
We don't need to persuade China to do anything.
I'll tell you one specific thing I would do.
Seriously, in terms of our global influence, do you think China is watching us and thinking, OK, they're thinking twice about
well, Fiona,
for example,
China has developed an electric vehicle with a 600-mile range, which looks like a Porsche Taycan and retails for $30,000 US. We need to learn from them. These people need to open their eyes and their ears, my God.
Watch what we're doing and think, oh, if they're not doing it, we won't do it either.
Oh, stupid China. Yeah, they make a Porsche Taycan EV for $30,000. Stupid China. When are they going to do something?
You might hear from someone else coming out a little bit later. I feel the UK has a huge role to play on the international stage, working with other partners, working with European and countries around the world in pressing for a better future, whether that's for the environment or for global security or for human rights and justice around the world. And we can play that leadership role by working with other countries. What we could also do is introduce a carbon tax on carbon-intensive imports, because it actually undermines British manufacturing if we're importing goods that are high carbon when British manufacturing can be supported to be low carbon. And I think that would be a really positive thing to do, because our government doesn't count the carbon impact of imported goods. Wouldn't it be great if we did far more to produce more goods, more of our food locally, support our farmers, support our manufacturers? Then we're more resilient for the future, and we're really leading the world in tackling what are the biggest issues.
Green populism. I love it.
Let's take a point at the back there, yeah.
I think one of the things is that we are 1% of the emitters of these
greenhouse gases.
Greenhouse gases. 30% does come from China, but maybe what should happen is we buy a lot of products from China, and maybe some of the 30% should be attributed to the countries that buy from them.
Correct.
That then we may stop.
More or less doubles China's emissions output, by the way.
And produce them in this country.
China's CO2 emissions per head are lower than the US, Canada, Australia, etc.
About this in a global context, and of course it's a global issue. But every action that we take to make ourselves more resilient as a country is good for Britain and is good for the people who live there. If we insulate our homes to bring bills down, keep our homes warm, if we invest in public transport to reduce the cost of that, make it more convenient to get about by public transport, if we support our farmers to produce more food locally by putting proper subsidies in place, if we invest in renewable energy, which is the cheapest way to generate electricity, these things will tackle the root causes of the cost of living crisis, and they'll create a more resilient future for people in this country. Wouldn't that be a good thing for Britain, regardless of the global leadership role that we have to play?
All right, let's take a question now from Keshia Bailey.
With such a broad migration policy, how will you ensure that public services will cope?
So let's talk about your migration policy as the Green Party of England and Wales. On your website, you talk about having a world without borders, and you also talk of migrants who come here will be able to bring dependence.
It's like Novara Media Rights Manifesto.
So, Keshia, thank you for the question. And yes, we do talk about people who gain a work permit being able to bring their spouses with them. I think that's absolutely right and humane that people should be able to do that. And I think we need to have a calm discussion in this country about how we approach the issue of migration, because we have always benefited from people coming to the UK, benefited economically. We benefit economically, we benefit socially. I'm sure we all know people who come to the UK to support us, and we only have to listen to the horrific comments that were exposed on Channel 4 last night of people immediately around Nigel Farage to remind ourselves of just what a stark future we could be heading in if people back him and reform in this election.
So what does a world without borders look like? Well, let's talk specifically about that, because that's quite a statement. It's not one that any other party, any mainstream party
By the
is
way,
making. So does that mean that
it already exists for rich white people? Okay, Fiona can go where she likes. She's got the money to pay for it. I like no borders for me. If I can fly here or there, 10,000 air miles a year, no problem. And by the way, don't increase the tax. But it's just the other 8 billion people.
This election for the next 5 years.
So are you distancing yourself?
I'm saying it's not something that we think is realistic in this next 5 years of this next Parliament.
But maybe what we
think is needed. Well, there are a number of things that need to happen. The first thing we need to do is to recognise that in terms of people coming here to work, you're more likely to be treated by someone who's a migrant from another country in the NHS than you are to have a migrant in front of you in the queue. And I've been spending the last few months supporting a close family member of mine who's been in the hospital, in Norfolk and Norwich Hospital, now in the care system, and has had fantastic support from staff who are severely overstretched in the NHS, and I hope we get to talk about NHS funding later on. But the point I'd make is our health system, our care system are dependent on skilled people coming from other countries to run them, just as so many other sectors are, and so many sectors that have struggled in the last few years as employment and migration policies have changed since Brexit. So I think we need to recognise and value the skills that people bring. And the people that have supported my family, and I'm sure support yours in the NHS, we need to welcome the skills that they bring to this country.
And there in the glasses.
It's all well and good to say immigration's great, and I think most people know that. But for 12 years in a row, we voted in a mandate that would reduce immigration, and it never happened. So is it now your opinion that we should just forget that and go with, forget that that's not happened, leave it be?
Take that up with the Tories, mate.
Well, there are a number of issues that we need to address. We've talked about people coming here to work. If we look at why people are coming to seek asylum, which is actually a much smaller proportion of the migration, but the one that often gets the attention, well, first of all, I don't think anyone wants to see the horrific scenes where people are risking their lives coming across the channel on small boats, and people often dying, being exploited by the horrific people smugglers who take advantage of people in very vulnerable situations. We have a proud record in this country of welcoming people who are fleeing war or persecution, or increasingly poverty or changes in the climate, which is particularly affecting poorer countries around the world. And we need to play our role internationally, working with all countries in the world in supporting a fair number of people who are seeking asylum. But we also need to look at what are the reasons why people are fleeing their homes. It is about poverty around the world. It is about war. It is about changes in the climate. And that's why the Green Party is alone in this election in saying we would not only restore the international aid budget that this government so dreadfully cut, which so many Conservative voters, let alone Green and other voters, were angry with, we would increase that budget and we would put more money into climate finance to support poorer countries in the world with adapting to the changes in the climate. And the man you might hear from later on will talk down changes in the climate. But if he's really serious about making sure that people around the world don't need to leave their homes and that we can actually address the real security challenges this country faces, then the big issue that people care about that I hear on the doorstep is that people know we need far stronger action to protect and defend our environment for future generations. And it's only the Green Party that's willing to stand in this election, and every vote the Green Party gets across this country, every Green MP that's elected will be a strong voice in Parliament pushing that new government to be bolder in the way that's needed for defending our environment and for putting in the funding that's needed for restoring our public services.
All right. There are quite a few things in your manifesto which a number of people have asked questions about.
The thing is, and I think that the Greens sort of neglect this somewhat, is that Conservative voters really care about quote-unquote conservation of British countryside. They really need to zone in on that.
The Prevent programme. How are you planning to tackle hate crime, misogyny, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia?
And for those who aren't necessarily up to speed on the Prevent programme, the Prevent programme aims to stop individuals becoming terrorists. That's its overall aim, using local authorities, community organisations, and obviously police play a major role in that. And your plan is to scrap it.
Well, thank you for that question. And of course, all of the issues that you raise need to be taken incredibly seriously. Misogyny, hate crimes are a major issue in this country. Violence against women and girls is a major issue. Islamophobia is clearly a major issue. And sadly, the divisiveness we've seen in this election, I fear, can only play to extra divisions in society. And we all have a role to play, whether that's politicians, whether it's any of us in society, to promote a more harmonious approach.
And it's a bit of an issue in your own party, isn't it? I mean, let's just talk about some of your candidates. Adam Pugh, who's a candidate for Deptford and Lewisham North, he tweeted about Royal Navy vessels sailing to the Mediterranean to support Israel. Obviously, as we all know, there's a war going on there in Gaza. He said, "I hope they sink." You've got Natalie Anderson. She's a candidate for Woking. She said online that this is a report anyway, that the 7/10 attacks, the October 7th attacks on Israel were orchestrated. You've got Simon Anthony. He's, again, a candidate of yours for Barking, compared Hamas to the French resistance. they're still candidates, so I assume you
All
support
these people
their
are being
views.
investigated.
I don't support any of those views that you've just outlined, Fiona, but I'll tell you
So
what...
why are they still candidates then?
Well, if there have been concerns raised about particular candidates, as there have been with some of our candidates...
I mean, these concerns have been around for a good few weeks.
Then those concerns are properly investigated through the right channels inside the party. Those channels are separate from the party leadership, which is a matter of good governance, according to bodies like the EHRC.
So, but the election's only a week away.
There have been instances where there have been
Really good answer.
candidates who were selected, who are no longer going forward. 5 out of the 574 candidates across England and Wales. We have heard that, sadly, all parties have had candidates who were selected in this election that have no longer gone forward.
So you're saying, hang on, just to be clear for all of us, you've got a system in place. It's just under a week now to the election. These 3 people, with the views that they have expressed, reportedly online, hoping the Royal Navy vessels sink, comparing Hamas to French resistance, whatever your process is, I mean, I've been reading about these people for some time, they are going to go ahead on next Thursday in your name, and you're happy with that?
Well, I can't comment on what all 574
I'm not asking
candidates
you to.
across the country
I'm
are standing,
asking
and
about 3.
I'm not familiar with those 3. What I can say is that if issues have been raised, they're being investigated internally. There have been a number of occasions where candidates have been asked to take down posts and have done so, and there have been other cases where candidates have been asked to withdraw or have been withdrawn. But the general point that I'd make is that we live at a time when internationally we're seeing absolutely horrific scenes in Gaza with there's now well over 35,000 people who have lost their lives.
Great
aid
answer.
not getting through, people their homes being blown apart, just horrific scenes that we were seeing, just as the absolutely horrific attacks on Israel on the 7th of October and the resulting taking of hostages is completely unjustified, and I say that unequivocally. So what we need to be very aware of in talking about this is that there are Jewish communities and Muslim communities in the UK and around the world who are feeling very vulnerable at the moment. And all of us, and I'd say this to candidates of any party, need to be very aware of that when we're talking about this issue. But that won't stop me standing up and saying that the UK needs to play its role internationally in putting pressure for there to be a ceasefire from both sides, and in saying that it's absolutely unacceptable for the UK to continue selling arms to Israel when the International Criminal Court has been very clear that Israel, as well as Hamas, has broken international law.
He's hitting the high notes. Very good.
Because we are in an election period, and I mentioned from candidates that a full list of candidates for those constituencies is available on the BBC website. Let's take a question now from Adam Norwood. Adam, whereabouts?
Hi.
Hang on, we'll just get the mic to you. There you go.
With a second Trump government looking likely from the west and war inching closer from the east, how will green defence policies keep us safe?
And
Great question.
For those of you who might not be as familiar with the Green Manifesto as perhaps you are, and certainly you are suggesting we scrap Trident, which is obviously our nuclear deterrent.
Well, Adam, the first thing you talked about was the prospect of a second Trump term, and watching the highlights from the debate last night, my heart sank, because clearly I want to see Biden elected instead of Trump. But there are clearly big questions now over whether people are going to get behind him, and big questions for the Democrat Party.
But how would green defence policies keep us safe? That's the question. And you're suggesting scrapping Trident.
So in relation to Trident, I think we should listen to what a number of retired army generals have said and what former defence secretaries have said, which is that Trident no longer addresses the security challenges that we face today. It was for a different
complete waste of money.
It doesn't address the global security challenges that we face either militarily or in terms of cyber security or other issues. Now, of course, I support retaining the rest of the defence budget and supporting our armed forces with the great work they do both to defend this country and humanitarian work around the world. And there's going to be more and more, sadly, humanitarian work around the world for our armed forces to do. But supporting them directly is the way that we need to put in that funding.
So your co-leader, Carla Denyer, was talking on the radio very recently, and she said she expressed a view that having Trident makes us more of a target for attack rather than deterrent. Is that a view you share?
Well, I think that the UK has long supported the idea that all countries that have a nuclear deterrent should work towards disarmament. But interestingly, this government hasn't actually taken any positive steps towards that.
No, but that's not the question I asked you. In fairness, I asked you, do you support your co-leader's view that for the UK to have Trident makes us more of a target?
So dumb, man. The level of debate in this country is so dumb. Trident, we pay the Americans infinity money for a system which uses Windows XP.
More of a target, that's why I'm just...
Really? Are you kidding me? And by the way, they're serviced in the US. We can't use them unless the Yanks let us. And we're paying infinity money, like hundreds of billions, for the whole system. For what? But you can't ask this on the BBC. You cannot ask this in legacy media. If you disagree with Trident being renewed, you're not serious. You're not serious. You don't want to give infinity money to America.
World without. But we need to work internationally to address this, and we need to put the funding and focus on the armed forces that's actually going to address the security challenges we face.
We've got just about a minute and a half left. Let's very quickly take a question from Sonia Foxall. Sorry, hang on, we'll just get a microphone over.
He's done well, huh? That really flew by.
I'm self-employed. I've seen increases in corporation tax, in dividend tax, and a frozen personal allowance. And now you want to tax me even more. Why?
So you're suggesting raising tax for higher earners, but also removing the cap on national insurance, which obviously needs an increase in what people will pay, for those earning more than $50,270.
So thank you for your question, Sonia. And just to clarify one point, we're not proposing any changes to income tax. We are proposing asking those earning over $50,000 to pay a little bit more in national insurance, because people who earn under $50,000 currently pay a higher proportion of their salary on national insurance than people who earn over $50,000. And so we're talking about £5 extra a week for someone earning $55,000. Now, what would that get you? At the moment, people can't access an NHS dentist. And if you can afford to do so, you might be forking out for a private dentist. Well, how much does that cost you over a year? How much does it cost you over a year to pay extortionate train ticket prices because we're not investing in our railways, or to have to heat your home and see your bills going up and up every month because we've got the leakiest homes in Europe and we haven't insulated them? So we're setting out a different vision, Sonia, for where, yes, we ask those earning a little bit more to pay a little bit more, including the multimillionaires and billionaires, but it's about a different type of society, because we're the only party that's willing to say we should be willing to invest more in restoring our NHS and defending our environment. And if we have a group of Green MPs in Parliament after the election, we can push the new government to be bolder on the issues that we really need to address.
I'm so sorry, I'm afraid we're out of time, but listen, thank you very much.
Don't applaud. Don't applaud. That might be a good social clip. We're out of time. Please go away.
Thank you.
I'm very curious to know if she interrupts Farage as much. I think she will give him a hard time, right? She has to.
Half of the programme. Now let's move on to our second half. I'd like you to please to welcome the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage.
Box office. Here we go.
So, as I said to Adrian and Nigel, I'll just remind you that you're here to answer the questions from the audience. You know, I will not interrupt you, that's my aim, unless, obviously, you stray off the point, or in fact the question isn't answered. So let's start with our first question tonight, which is from Mark Corden.
Hello. I'd like to know, what is it about you and your party that attracts racists and extremists, whether you say you want them or not?
Well, I've done more. I've done more to drive the far right out of British politics than anybody else alive. I took on the BNP just over a decade ago. I said to their voters, if this is a protest vote, but you don't support their racist agenda, don't vote for them, vote for me. And we destroyed them. I've never allowed in parties I've led anybody who was even a member of an extremist organisation to join our parties. What happened over the last weekend was truly astonishing. A tirade of invective abuse directed at the Prime Minister. I mean, the whole thing was unbelievable. It didn't ring true. So I checked it out. It turns out the man that did this is an actor. He was contacted by the Telegraph this morning. He denied he was an actor. We then found out, yes, actually, he is an actor. He's worked in the past for Channel 4. On his own site, he says, I'm a well-spoken actor with an alter ego. I do rough talking. Let me tell you, from the minute he turned up in that office in Clacton and I saw him, he was acting from the very start. He even says on his website, hire me, I do undercover filming.
Should we just explain?
Let me finish.
No, just in case people aren't totally familiar with what you're talking about.
These are the comments, and Rishi Sunak's reacted to them today.
Sure.
We need to be clear here. The allegations being made by Channel 4 go beyond just this one person. It includes staff members who've been working alongside Nigel Farage since he was with UKIP. She needs to challenge him on that.
Well, I expect you have, but just in case there's anyone at home who hasn't seen it, so there was a report on Channel 4 where a man saying he was a canvasser for you said some absolutely extraordinarily racist comments. What you are saying now is that he's an actor. And that it's a setup, effectively. I can just say, Channel 4 say, we strongly stand by our journalism. Well, I have to put their point of view. They're not here to answer. We met the man, Mr. Parker, for the first time at Reform UK. Hang on, I have to put their right to reply, as I would have to put yours. We met Mr. Parker for the first time at Reform UK party headquarters, where he was a Reform Party canvasser. They say they didn't pay him, they didn't know him, and that he was filmed covertly. So if it was a setup, when you're saying it was, very clear, you've been saying that all day, who set it up? Are you saying that Channel 4 paid this guy? They're denying it. Paid this guy to set you up?
Channel 4 used a production company, which of course gives them deniability. What I have no doubt about is this guy was in his alter ego. I've even found now on TikTok this guy doing sort of Alf Garnett type stuff. This was a comedy act, but it was designed to hurt us. And sadly, some people believe it. Let me promise you.
So who do you think would have done this, Nigel Farage?
I want nothing to do with people like him, and he has nothing to do with us. He's somebody who turned up, we didn't know who he was, and by sheer coincidence, he happened to get teamed up with Channel 4, who we'd worked for in the past. I'm sorry.
So in order for this theory to be right, I'm not saying it's wrong or right, I don't know.
Not a theory, I'm telling you that he lied to a telegraph.
No, what I'm saying is in order
it is a theory.
what you're suggesting to be correct, someone, I'm assuming you're saying, you're being careful not to say it's Channel 4, but someone must have paid this man to basically pretend to be a racist and therefore to smear you. So that must be someone from within the media, I assume. Is that what you're saying?
It may well have been the production company, or it's the guy himself who wanted publicity to get more parts.
And then contacted the media company to make sure they filmed at the right moment?
What I know is this is a political setup of astonishing proportions.
Right. Mark, what do you think
about the staffer?
Well, I mean, that's one example from today, but what about the multiple examples from throughout your career? I mean,
from Channel 4.
Everybody
from Channel 4, the same piece of reportage.
Across,
No, sorry, that was what that man said yesterday. And by the way, if you doubt what I'm saying, I'm back in Birmingham on Sunday. We're holding an event. It'll be the biggest event of this election campaign. I'd love you to come along. Our star speaker, Zia Youssef, who is a practicing Muslim but a proud Brit, and he's going to come along and explain to us why immigration and relations between communities and the growth of extremism are the most important things in this campaign. And one more
if you've not heard that name before, he's the largest donor to Reform during this general election campaign. 37-year-old Muslim, Sri Lankan heritage, millionaire, recently sold his business for around 25 million, I think. Very sharp guy. But yes, he's backing Reform.
Made it quite clear.
I stand on my record.
OK, well, let's talk about your record. You've very clearly wanted to distance yourself from this man, Andrew Parker. We've all heard that.
Anyone.
Anyone. Let's talk about some of your candidates. So
the staffer.
I've thought long and hard about this. The kind of language that is ascribed to them, that is reported as having been said by them, is not the kind of language I would ever use. But also, we know what we're talking about, and forgive me if I offend you at home, I'm going to repeat some of it. So Leslie Lilly, candidate for Southend, East and Rochford, who said of migrants on small boats, more scum entering the UK, I hope your family get robbed, beaten or attacked. Edward Oakenfull, your candidate for Derbyshire Dales, who says importing sub-Saharan Africans would dilute the IQ of the country. Your candidate, Robert Lomas, Barnsley North, who says, and these are difficult words to say, black people of Britain should get up off their lazy arses and stop acting like savages. I apologise to those offended by that. These are your candidates. Why are they still your candidates?
I don't know any of them, obviously, but
this has been widely reported. Why are you still standing by them?
As you just went through with the Greens, you know, every party's had problems with the snap election. I organised a professional London vetting company. We paid them £144,000 up front.
True. Doesn't explain the staffer, but that's true.
They didn't do it. Now, I think this was the first of a series of the establishment not wanting us to do well. And I'm afraid I'm seeing it from the Russia hoax to what happened with this guy yesterday. And the reason is very clear.
Well, hang on, that's not the question I'm asking. That's not the question
This
I'm
is our
asking.
Russia hoax.
And Mark here talked about things that have been said by candidates. Now, hang on, Nigel Farage, please answer this question. This has been widely reported. These comments, hang on, let me finish. These comments by your candidates have been widely reported. You don't need a vetting company to find them. They're out there in the public domain, in the newspapers, online. Why are they still standing as your candidates?
I inherited a start-up party. Remember, I've been doing this...
Why are they still standing as your candidates?
Well, they're not. They've been disowned. In most cases, they've been disowned. But people like Lily from... I mean, honestly, what he said is criminal.
So why is it your candidate?
Wrong. I have no idea why this man...
You are the leader.
I wasn't the
You
leader.
are now.
I inherited this. It was a start-up party. I paid a professional London vetting company to weed this out. The work wasn't done. We're a start-up, and all start-ups, whether they're business or political parties, get some wrong uns in the end.
Well, now I've pointed it out to you. Are you going to withdraw your support from these people?
I wouldn't want anything to do with them.
So shall we take it that you have withdrawn your support from these three people?
I want nothing to do with them.
OK, let's take some more questions. Yes, the man there in the glasses.
Yeah, I mean, I know some of my friends, they have start-up companies, but none of them employ a whole slew of massive racists like you. So
This format is really bad for Farage. They wanted this, by the way. He asked for this.
I'm not an actor myself, but I want to defend actors. Not all actors are racist, but, you know, probably the only actors who are racist are the actors in your party, the
Hang on
Reform
a second. The Labour candidate, I mean, we're talking about Clacton here, the Labour candidate in Clacton has made some deeply offensive, racist remarks, so much so that Keir Starmer has banished him from the constituency and said, go to the Midlands. So you get people in all parties saying wrong things and bad things. Wherever I find it, I always drive it out. And I've done that all my career.
Well, they're still standing, but from what I understand, you're going to stop them standing for reform anyway from now on. Yes, woman in the red and black top there.
I just want to know, when are you actually going to take responsibility of your actions and say sorry and stop making excuses?
I'm not going to apologise. I'm not going to apologise for what, and we'll find out the full truth. But I promise you, what happened over the weekend, what was on the front page of the Times today, is a set-up, a deliberate attempt to smear us. It's almost, when you look at it, what he said is almost unbelievable. A constant stream of invective. And he does this for a living. He does it professionally. And he came along in his alter ego and did it. It's wrong.
It's not a million miles from what these candidates are reporting.
What about the staffer? Okay. The staffer.
The woman with the blonde hair here.
Nigel Farage, I just have a question about being a paid actor. You also run you are online on a website called Cameo, where you'll record paid shorts of you doing roasts or pep talks for people.
I do.
I was just wondering, your cheapest ones you do are £70. If I paid you £70 now, would you admit that this country would be nothing without our rich history of immigration?
Well, I tell you what. And
Get
this
that
is
on
what's
Insta.
gone wrong. Because you talk about immigration, and it ran from after the war up until the millennium at net 30 to 40,000 a year. And yes, it worked. In fact, we had the most successful immigration policies of any country in the whole of Europe. No question. Now, it is so totally out of control. Just think about this. 2.5 million people have come in the last 2 years. You wonder why you can't get a house. You wonder why your rents have gone up 25% in 4 years. You wonder why our infrastructure is struggling. You wonder why we have to build a new house every 2 minutes just to cope with the numbers. And that's the issue. It's now running at numbers that are literally unimaginable and are diminishing the quality of life of everybody in this country. And frankly, this should be the biggest issue of this election.
OK. So many of you asked about this topic. I'm just
what he's saying is very persuasive. We had net immigration of 1.3 million, very high by historic standards. Labour and the Tories say they're going to bring that down.
Why can't you accept that it's your violent racist rhetoric that's causing this? And it's not an establishment that's against you?
I'm sorry, that is unfair and wrong in every single way. I just talked there a moment ago about the immigration problem, which is numbers. I talked a moment ago about Zia Youssef, a practicing Muslim in Britain who's the biggest donor to our party in this campaign. I talked about my previous history of really helping to close down the BNP. I don't accept, sir, what you've just said for one moment.
Okay, let's just one more point. The man in the shirt just behind you, yeah.
You said within the last 2 years. My wife is a non-UK national from Nepal. She came to the UK within the last 2 years. Are you saying people like her are not welcome anymore?
What I'm saying is we cannot have limitless numbers of people coming into Britain. It is making us poorer. It is diminishing our quality of life. We need to get back to where we were, where we had a sensible policy, where people came to us from friendly countries all over the world, and it was a success. We cannot go on with net migration.
Bear in mind, Farage has been in politics since the late 1990s. He's been saying this stuff for a very long time. So when does he want to go back? Need to pin him down on that.
Reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. And the funny thing is that Keir Starmer, on his 6 priorities, doesn't even talk about this issue, simply doesn't seem to care. And I think people are joining up the dots that actually the overcrowded country we're living in is not working.
OK, now we've got a question related to that, but before we do, I just have to say, yet again, because we are in an election period, and I have mentioned some particular constituencies that are fullest of candidates.
I have to say, this does seem like a very tough audience for
Dee
Farage.
Williams, let's hear from you. Yeah.
Good evening, Nigel.
Hello.
Your core pledge concerning illegal migration states that migrants in small boats could be returned to France. How will you achieve this?
Well, we have something called the Royal Marines, if it comes to it. But you know what? We won't need to do that. I was the first person 4 years ago going out into the Channel, filming this, saying there was a massive problem coming down the tracks. Everybody ignored me. Everyone laughed at me. But here we are, 4,000 boats later, 128,000 people later, 91% of them men, mostly young men.
So Dee is asking very specifically, how will this be? How will you return people from boats to France?
We cannot. Well, we won't do any of this. We won't deport anyone to Rwanda. We won't solve the problem in any way at all until we leave a meddling court in Strasbourg that has gone way beyond its powers. We have to leave.
You're talking about the European Court of Human Rights.
We have to leave the European Court of Human Rights, get back our own sovereignty, declare that anyone comes via this route will not get refugee status. And if that doesn't work, we'll pick them up in the Channel and take them back. And by the way, we've given the French £500 million. They should not, under the international law of the sea, have their navy escorting boats to our 12-mile line. We did a tough negotiation with the French as well. The other parties literally have nothing to say about this, because when we did try and send a plane to Rwanda, it was actually on the runway when the court intervened.
But if you're returning these small boats to France, surely it's going to be willing ports that are going to accept these small boats back. How is that going to achieve? Well, where are these willing ports?
Well, the Australians towed the boats back to Indonesia 12 years ago, and that ended the problem.
But the Australians had a deal. I think what Dee is
France
getting
and nuclear power on the UN Security Council.
You know, I'm no diplomat for France, but France is unlikely to take kindly, as you said yourself, to the idea that you come along and you get the migrants into a boat, you then go back over to France. I don't know if you've got a landing craft or something, and then you make them. No, hang on. Let's just the practicalities. I think that's what Dee's asking. And then they step out onto the sand, or onto. What happens at that moment? Do you think the French are just going to take?
Well, they've come from the sand. But here's the point.
No, but do you think how is that going to work? Now, do you think the French will just accept it?
If they know they can't stay, they won't come. And it's interesting to think. In the last year of the Labour government, they deported 47,000 people who'd come here illegally.
Okay, but they won't stay if they won't come if they can't stay. Dee's asking very specifically, how will it work? So your plan
I'm telling you,
to put them in small.
Hang on,
to put them. I'm just repeating your words. To put them in small boats and take them back to France.
No, I said.
How is that practically going to happen?
I said we leave the ECHR. We declare that no one that comes via this route gets refugee status. And by the way, we've given 500,000 people refugee status since 2016. We're very, very generous, and we deport anybody that's here illegally, as we used to, under Labour and Tory governments. No more boats will come.
But how will you get the countries to accept them?
If they do, we get the Royal Marines to take them back to the beaches from which they took off. I hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, that's what we have to do. And very interesting that Keir Starmer echoed my words the other night in the debate. He said it's a national security emergency. Well, boy, he is right, because these are young men coming from countries plagued by terrorism, plagued by gang culture. Many of them have fought in wars, and coming from countries that don't even treat women as second-class citizens. It's a very, very serious situation.
I'm still not entirely... have we had an answer to your question, do you feel?
Not exactly, no. I've just got this vision of like the D-Day landings in reverse when we're sort of offloading all these poor people onto the sands of Omar Beach.
All right, OK. Well, let's hear from some more of our... Yes, the man there in striking shirt.
Nigel, if you had to flee persecution from the UK and seek asylum in a different country, how would you like to be treated?
The way that we've treated 500,000 people since 2016.
But you want to stop it?
The way we did in the past with the Ugandan Asians, and the way we did a couple of times with Jews fleeing Russia or fleeing Austria or Germany. We of all European countries have always understood what a genuine refugee is. I promise you, the vast majority of these young men crossing the English Channel do not and never would have qualified as refugees.
Let's take one more point. I presume you're going to talk
Didn't
about...
answer the question, though.
A lot of the language you use about political smear campaigns and the biggest rallies is quite reminiscent to me of Trump in America. Would you say that you're like-minded characters?
No, we're incredibly different people. Incredibly different people. I happen to support him for one big reason. I think the world's in a more dangerous place than it's been at any point in the lifetimes, probably of any of us in this room. I fear what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in Ukraine, what potentially could happen in Taiwan. I see Iran, Russia, China lining up together. I'm very fearful for where we might be. And I think peace comes through strength and not through weakness. And I think Biden has been an incredibly weak American president. That was evidenced on that debate last night. And I want someone strong, but somebody who's a peacemaker. Remember, the Abraham Accords were Arab states and Israel joining up together. That's why I support him.
Wasim Chowdhury, let's take a question from you. Whereabouts are you, Wasim? There you go.
Evening. So you claim that Brexit will help Britain prosper. Why hasn't it?
In economic terms, if you look at our exports, we've gone from the day we voted Brexit to now from being the world's 7th biggest exporter to the world's 4th biggest exporter.
Not in trade, as I'm sure you'll concede.
Well, trade and services.
In services and gold, but not in trade.
Well, trade is both. Trade is both.
Farage is correct.
In goods, I'm so sorry, in goods.
No. Well, in goods. Well, we've given up manufacturing things is part of the reason for that. But I want to say this. There are two massive disappointments with Brexit, and one of them is economic. 5.5 million men and women in this country running small limited companies or acting as sole traders, living under a huge, burdensome rule book, living under VAT thresholds that are too low, damaging genuine growth and prosperity in the economy. Those of us that voted Brexit, those of us that saw an 80-seat majority for Boris Johnson in 2019, the opportunity to free up those small businesses, to get rid of rules and regulations, and the Conservative government have done none of it. And that is a huge regret. It's not a failure of Brexit, it's a failure to deliver what people voted for.
Wasim, since you asked this question, if you don't mind me asking, how did you vote in the EU referendum?
I voted to leave.
And you're asking this question because you're happy with what you're seeing now or unhappy?
I'm unhappy. I understand Nigel's not the Prime Minister, but I mean, on the ground level, for the common working man and woman, nothing's changed. Everything's expensive now. People are really struggling with the cost of living crisis. I don't think, I mean, what's needed at the moment is so vast that I don't think anyone's really put anything serious forward. And I think many working class people look to you
to Nigel,
to Nigel to deliver on Brexit. I'm a Labour voter. But I voted for Brexit, and I thought things would possibly change, as did many people. But on the ground level, if you look at what's happening at the moment in the country, there's a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of people who are, struggling at the moment. And who cares about them? No one cares about them, because I think you have one group of people who live a certain way, a very small number of people, and then you have everybody else. And I don't think they can resonate with how the average common man and woman in this country lives. And it's all well and good to just talk about one issue, but there's a much wider issue.
And obviously, Nigel,
I totally get that, and that's why the main policy platform, domestic policy platform that we're running on in this election that will make a huge difference to that group of people you're talking about is to lift the threshold at which people start paying tax to £20,000 a year. Why? because it means the lower paid in society will be better off, and you've talked about increasing
Let me quickly
poverty.
just
But
clarify this.
Can I just wait a minute?
That's the threshold you'd start paying income tax. If it kept up with inflation, it would presently be around 16,500. It's just under 13 at the moment. So it's not as crazy as it sounds. It would cost a hell of a lot, though.
Would receive, under your policies, 28 pence for every pound, but the bottom 10% would only get 2 pence for every pound. So the richest households would, there'd be an increase of 4.3% for them, but only 2.3% increase for the poor. So how is it benefiting the poor?
In percentage terms, those that would benefit the most are those on low pay. But here's the crucial bit.
Well, not according to some economists who are saying actually it would be much more.
Well, we don't
in
think
percentage increase.
We don't think that staff nurses in hospital should pay 40% tax, right? People have been dragged in to higher and higher taxes.
But just to check, so you're saying my figures are wrong, are you?
In percentage terms, they're wrong, yes.
OK, so that's the IPPR.
There's not many nurses on 50,000. If they are, they're not going to be paying 40% on very much. Let's be frank.
Let me tell you. Benefits. 9.2 million people of working age not working. They're not all layabouts.
Many choosing to retire early.
I bet we all know people on benefits who'd love to get back to work. But if they work for more than 16 hours a week, they lose their benefits. They're better off staying on benefit than going to work. They're the winners. They're the winners out of starting tax at £20,000 a year. Mums with small children and many others. And I tell you what, that would do more for the poorest in society, more than any of the other parties have even considered or discussed.
Well, at the back there, yes.
Hello, I'm a doctor in the NHS. My parents and myself were migrants to this country. You've said that the reason that there's waiting lists for the NHS, there's not enough houses, there's not enough, the cost of living's too high is because of migrants. But since Brexit, there's been shortages of critical medications in the NHS, from what I understand, because of supply chain issues, such as IV paracetamol and other medications that help people not die. As someone that we have to thank for Brexit, what would you propose that we should do about this?
Well, what I blame for problems in the NHS, I wasn't blaming migrants, I was blaming the population explosion. You know, I mean, we've had a 10 million increase in the British population since 1997, a 6 million increase since 2010.
It's not babies, is it?
There's not enough of certain types of medications.
In terms of medication...
Is because too many people are using them. Is that what you're saying?
The reason we have a waiting list...
No, she's asking... She's asking specifically about the difficulty. No, you're asking very specifically, because you mentioned paracetamol and ibuprofen.
Well, here's the point.
Well, just so we're clear what the question is...
And it's not just paracetamol and ibuprofen, it's medications that are critical to keep people alive.
And you're saying, in your experience, that Brexit is either wholly or partly the reason why it's harder to get those medications.
I do remember being told before the vote that we'd get all sorts of diseases if we voted Brexit, but here's the point. Freed from the European Medicines Agency, and thank goodness we are. And if as a doctor you believed in the vaccine rollout, of course, you'd have noticed, and there are questions about it, but you'd have noticed our vaccine rollout was way ahead of Europe. Why? We'd left the European Union.
Nigel, in fairness, you're not at all answering her question. Her question is about a shortage of medicine.
We now are free from the European Medicines Agency to run our own procurement policy,
but it's not working.
Which means
that's her point.
Buy whatever drugs we need from anywhere in the world without having to get them registered.
It's not working.
Well, if it's not working, it's rather like, back to the earlier point, we are now free. We're in charge. We can buy drugs from anywhere in the world. If the NHS is failing to do that, that's on them, not Brexit.
Man here in the black T-shirt.
How much better off are you because of the taxes you don't have to pay through the UK leaving the European Union?
I'm not.
To be fair to Farage, taxes have gone up in the last 4 years.
Because the tax burden is now, for working people, is now the highest since 1948. And this is the trickery. I mentioned earlier about staff nurses. 40p tax was the top rate of tax in this country, right? From the mid-80s right through to the end of Tony Blair's time. And 1.5 million people paid that top rate of tax. Because of sleight of hand and freezing allowances, by the end of 2027, it'll be 8 million people paying that level of tax. Fascinatingly, both Labour and Conservatives agree they're going to keep the tax bands frozen. You will all be paying more tax under the next government, whether it's Labour or whether it's Conservative.
One there.
We heard from the Green Party before you, and to me they felt full of hope. Listening to you, it feels full of fear. Does that bother you, that you give an atmosphere of fear and perhaps people vote for you because they're worried about what will happen?
I want to help the poorest in society, lift them out of society, get people off benefits, which won't just help them economically, but psychologically too. I want to get a grip on the population explosion so that for the NHS and others, we can start to catch up. I want our young people, our small businesses to be freed from regulation, to become more profitable. Actually, what I'm offering is, and look, we know Labour are going to win, right? We've known from the start Labour will win. What I'm offering is a platform to campaign on for the next 5 years. It is positive, it is optimistic, it is about building a better Britain, but recognising that right now it's broken and the two leading parties offer no solutions at all.
Man there in the black T-shirt, yeah, on the left.
Nigel, how do you plan to pay for it? Like, there's a lot of stuff in your manifesto, but how do you actually plan to pay for all this stuff? Conservative and Labour, they're not offering all these things you're offering, so how do you actually plan to pay for it all?
Fair dues. By the way, I won't call it a manifesto, because I think the word association with manifesto is lie. So I'm calling it a contract.
Yeah, but just to be clear, a contract has a legal status, so the people here potentially could sue you if you don't do what you say. So you might call it a contract. I think by any definition, it isn't one.
I'm always prepared to take
It's more like a manifesto.
That's fine. Point number one, a racket that goes on between the Bank of England and the banks with their money. I'm not a big fan of the banks, as some might know. That's costing up to £35 billion a year. Point number two, the HS2 project, which is just hopelessly out of date for the modern world. I'd scrap the rest of that, we'd save £35 billion. But the big one.
So you're just going to leave all the HS2 that's already been built, that's all just going to be scrapped, all the construction
Well, very often in life, the first cut's the best cut. We started off with HS2 with an estimated bill of £38 billion. Suddenly it looks like it could be up to £150 billion.
So money down the drain then, essentially?
Yes, but rather than putting more down the drain.
Not doing half of it.
But the big one is this. Both parties want to decarbonise the grid. We're told by Labour we can do it up to 2030. We're told by the Conservatives we can do it up to 2035. We can't. It's literally impossible. It is going to be the single most expensive thing we have ever done in the history of these islands. We can comfortably save £30 billion a year by growing up and being sensible and recognising if we want carbon-free energy, reliable, not intermittent, carbon-free energy, the only way to go is small modular nuclear reactors.
Okay,
and that's the future that I foresee.
I'm afraid I have to cut you off there, Nigel, forgive me. Our time is up.
No.
Thank you very much.
Just started.
Half an hour. Thank you very much, Nigel Farage. Thank you very much for our audience. That is it. Question Time will be back next Friday, not Thursday. Of course, that's polling day. On Friday, we'll be in London picking over the actual election results. Who knows where we'll be then? For now, from Birmingham, from all of us here, bye-bye.
Don't you go anywhere. Don't you dare. This is the best bit. That is that. We've got analysis coming up. First, though, we are funded here at Novara Media entirely by our audience. We're building people-powered media, have you noticed? If you want to be part of that, go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. Our mission here at Novara Media is basically very simple. We think you can't change politics in this country if you don't change the media first. We're getting going with that. Now, let's look at some of the more notable moments from that debate on green policy. Adrian Ramsay faced a classic attack line. And why bother when China exists?
Climate is a global issue, and the UK government needs to play a global role in advocating for the changes that are needed, but also in leading by example. Because what we do here in the UK does still have an impact internationally. We shouldn't talk ourselves down in that respect. And also the changes that we need to make for the UK will benefit us regardless of what other countries do.
But specifically, the question is about how we're going to persuade China and India, given that they
I'll tell you one specific thing I would do.
Seriously, in terms of our global influence, do you think China is watching us and thinking, OK, they're thinking twice about gas licenses, for example, which actually is, and the current government is not the case, but say under Labour it would be the case. Do you think that would, do you genuinely think that that would affect whether China would open new oil wells or drill for gas or new coal mines. They'd watch what we're doing and think, oh, if they're not doing it, we won't do it either.
It's not just about what the UK does. It's about our role on the international stage. And contrary to what you might hear from someone else coming out a little bit later, I feel the UK has a huge role to play on the international stage, working with other partners, working with European and countries around the world in pressing for a better future, whether that's for the environment or for global security or for human rights and justice around the world. And we can play that leadership role by working with other countries. What we could also do is introduce a carbon tax on carbon-intensive imports, because it actually undermines British manufacturing if we're importing goods that are high carbon when British manufacturing can be supported to be low carbon. And I think that would be a really positive thing to do, because our government doesn't count the carbon impact of imported goods. Wouldn't it be great if we did far more to produce more goods, more of our food locally, support our farmers, support our manufacturers? Then we're more resilient for the future, and we're really leading the world in tackling what are the biggest issues of our time. We are talking about this in a global context, and of course it's a global issue. But every action that we take to make ourselves more resilient as a country is good for Britain and is good for the people who live there. If we insulate our homes to bring bills down, keep our homes warm, if we invest in public transport to reduce the cost of that, make it more convenient to get about by public transport, if we support our farmers to produce more food locally by putting proper subsidies in place, if we invest in renewable energy, which is the cheapest way to generate electricity, these things will tackle the root causes of the cost of living crisis, and they'll create a more resilient future for people in this country. Wouldn't that be a good thing for Britain, regardless of the global leadership role that we have to play?
Perfectly nice words there from Adrian Ramsay, but the line of attack against China is just comically absurd. China, in terms of solar capacity, wind, storage, nuclear, it's adding more each year than basically the rest of the world put together, particularly on solar. More than the rest of the world put together. And yes, it's got very high CO2 emissions. Per capita, it's below the US, below Australia, below Canada. By the way, none of those countries have high-speed rail. China has, I think, something like 2/3 of all high-speed rail infrastructure across the planet. It's in China. It's developing cheap electric vehicles. It has a Xiaomi car that's now been bought up for the rest of this year, $30,000 US, 600-mile range, looks like a Porsche Taycan. And you're saying these people aren't doing anything on climate change. You still have, by the way, people on the right saying that, and then they say we can't allow the Chinese to dump their cheap solar cells and electric cars into Europe. Which is it? Anyway. And now the first mention of Gaza in the show came in relation to statements made by Green Party candidates. But Adrian Ramsay was able to steer it back to foreign policy.
You've got a system in place. It's just under a week now to the election. These three people, with the views that they have expressed, reportedly online, hoping the Royal Navy vessels sink, comparing Hamas to French resistance. Whatever your process is, I mean, I've been reading about these people for some time. They are going to go ahead on next Thursday in your name, and you're happy with that?
Well, I can't comment on what all 574
I'm not asking you
candidates across
to.
the country
I'm
are standing, and
three.
I'm not familiar with those three. What I can say is that if issues have been raised, they're being investigated internally. There have been a number of occasions where candidates have been asked to take down posts and have done so, and there have been other cases where candidates have been asked to withdraw or have been withdrawn. But the general point that I'd make is that we live at a time when internationally we're seeing absolutely horrific scenes in Gaza with there's now well over 35,000 people who have lost their lives, aid not getting through, their homes being blown apart, just horrific scenes that we were seeing, just as the absolutely horrific attacks on Israel on the 7th of October and the resulting taking of hostages is completely unjustified, and I say that unequivocally. So what we need to be very aware of in talking about this is that there are Jewish communities and Muslim communities in the UK and around the world who are feeling very vulnerable at the moment, and all of us, and I'd say this to candidates of any party, need to be very aware of that when we're talking about this issue. But that won't stop me standing up and saying that the UK needs to play its role internationally in putting pressure for there to be a ceasefire from both sides, and in saying that it's absolutely unacceptable for the UK to continue selling arms to Israel when the International Criminal Court has been very clear that Israel, as well as Hamas, has broken international law.
Oh, that was a tough question, and he responded very well. He got a round of applause at the end. And this idea that some parliamentary candidate says something really stupid, therefore that's awful and evil. You know, I would love to see the same level, and this isn't what's about to, this is a real question I want to raise here. I would love to see the same level of invective from Fiona Bruce with regards to Palestinian children losing their arms and legs, being murdered in their beds. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? But we have to get more upset about people saying from the river to the sea on a demonstration in central London rather than children being killed in their beds. That is how the British media works. Of course, the major story is here. And by the way, some people will respond to awful things in ways that they perhaps regret later on. We've all done that in life, haven't we? But the idea that somebody's saying, oh, I hope this Royal Navy ship sinks or whatever, obviously I don't think that person saying that believes that, by the way. They're saying that because of just the most brutal, appalling scenes. I'm sure some of you saw this. Near Rafah, the child that was being held up, the baby. I've got a 7-month-old daughter. The baby being held up by their parent after they had their head blown off. If somebody sees that, they're going to say stuff that really they otherwise wouldn't say, right? And I find it very puzzling, frankly, that the British media doesn't quite grasp this. But there you go. Maybe they think it's not so bad in Palestine. I don't know. I'm sure, by the way, most of them do. I mean, it's fucking horrific. Next on to Nigel Farage. Racism within Reform UK was one of today's biggest stories, I'm sure you saw. Here's the first of many questions on that topic.
What is it about you and your party that attracts racists and extremists, whether you say you want them or not?
Well, I've done more. I've done more to drive the far right out of British politics than anybody else alive. I took on the BNP just over a decade ago. I said to their voters, if this is a protest vote, but you don't support their racist agenda, don't vote for them, vote for me. And we destroyed them. I've never allowed in parties I've led anybody who was even a member of an extremist organisation to join our parties. What happened over the last weekend was truly astonishing. A tirade of invective abuse directed at the Prime Minister. I mean, the whole thing was unbelievable. It didn't ring true. So I checked it out. It turns out the man that did this is an actor. He was contacted by the Telegraph this morning. He denied he was an actor. We then found out, yes, actually, he is an actor. He's worked in the past for Channel 4. On his own site, he says, I'm a well-spoken actor with an alter ego. I do rough talking. Let me tell you, from the minute he turned up in that office in Clacton and I saw him, he was acting from the very start. He even says on his website, hire me, I do undercover filming.
Sure.
This is a total and utter setup that has been leapt on, of course, by our political opponents.
Farage insinuating repeatedly, by the way, that Channel 4 are involved. He didn't say it specifically. That's kind of what it sounded like. I know a few of you have said in the comments that this was a very hard audience for Farage. I kind of think it probably was. It was in Birmingham. I kind of think it probably was. However, I also would push back and say this format doesn't suit Farage. Farage is very, very good on the front foot, talking about two things: migration, where he's broadly in line with a big chunk of the country. You might not say the majority, but a big chunk of it. And things that are coded as patriotic. So, for instance, when Rishi Sunak left D-Day, he's very strong on that stuff. Having to defend his record, having to defend his candidates, having to defend the various mishaps in his political career, having to defend the vulnerabilities of the people he's worked alongside, his own views, he's much weaker. And I don't quite understand why Reform UK insisted on their appearing on this platform. They wanted to be alongside Labour and the Tories, the main parties. That was the event, of course, last week with the BBC. The BBC said we can't do that. It'd be too many parties. The SNP too, of course. John Swinney was there, the Lib Dems. So you can have your own one next week with the Greens. I think, frankly, Farage would have been better off without it. This format is not good for him. Next up, here was a brilliantly framed question on migration.
Nigel, if you had to flee persecution from the UK and seek asylum in a different country, how would you like to be treated?
The way that we've treated 500,000 people since 2016, and the way we did in the past with the Ugandan Asians, and the way we did a couple of times with Jews fleeing Russia or fleeing Austria, or Germany. We of all European countries have always understood what a genuine refugee is. I promise you, the vast majority of these young men crossing the English Channel do not and never would have qualified as refugees.
Now, I love this because he's being asked, what would you do if you were a refugee? It's a great question, isn't it? Of course, it could happen theoretically to anyone. If you couldn't live in your home country because of persecution or war or natural disaster, how would you wish to be treated by a host country? And Farage says, I would like to be treated, and he lists these things off, and I'm thinking, they let people in. You don't want to let people in. They let people in. Britain, I think, more or less, has about 50, 60,000 successful refugee asylum applications every year. It's higher some years, lower some years, but that's the ballpark figure. If you think that there aren't significantly more stateless people fleeing persecution, war, natural disaster than that, come on. Afghanistan's population is what, around 40 million? Syria, Libya, Yemen, Iraq. We could go on and on and on. Of course, many people fleeing some of those places end up countries next door. So most people who have left, for instance, Palestine since its occupation in the mid-1940s, after the formation of the State of Israel, most Palestinians live in the adjoining countries. They live, in Lebanon, for instance. They aren't coming to Europe, most of them. So I don't understand really his answer. How would you like to be treated? I would like to be treated the same way that people who were let in were treated. Okay, that's kind of undermining your own thinking there. Question for you guys there who are at home watching, whether that's live or later on. Who was the biggest winner for you? Who was the biggest loser? I think the biggest winner for me was Adrian Ramsay, and I think the biggest loser, purely by virtue of the format, was Nigel Farage. This wasn't just a waste of his time. This only came with downsides. There were no upsides for him. This was a waste of his night, and actually, it was a net negative. Some people might say that's because the audience is bad, it's BBC. I think just the way that the debate works in terms of having to defend yourself from criticism is not playing to Farage's strengths. I thought Adrian Ramsay is not necessarily Carla Denia, but it's interesting that the Green Party, with this very radical manifesto, have two front people who are quite sort of, they're not boring. I've met Carla Denia. She's lovely. She's very interesting and nice and clever, but they come across as like civil servants, right? They're not, at the barricades, radicals. Or maybe they are, but they conceal it very well. I think that works, by the way. I really think that works. This kind of technocrat green who actually is concealing quite radical politics. So let's look at some of your super chats before we go any further, and maybe some comments too. This is from Straight Jacket Fashion on Farage, £4.99 super chat. He's driven racists and bigots to his parties, served drinks and normalised their rhetoric. BNP's Nick Griffin on Question Time was a laughing stock. You're referring to Nick Griffin being on Question Time, about 15 years ago, after the BNP got, 2 members of European Parliament. I think clearly on migration, the country's moved very right on migration. Farage would say that's because so many more people are coming here. Lots of people are coming here after we've left the European Union. So, also on the ECHR, we have to leave the ECHR, European Court on Human Rights. Why wasn't that part of the 2016 debate? And when we leave the ECHR, will you make the same excuses you're making about leaving the EU? Well, we left the EU, but now people aren't taking the advantages. Will it be, we left the ECHR, but people aren't taking the advantages? When does it end? When do the excuses stop? Coom Eternal with £2. Whatever happened with the Panama Papers scandal? You tell me. I sometimes think we have too many scandals and people kind of, zone out. We've got scandal fatigue. £5. I don't know who this is from. Maybe that's the best. Totally unrelated, but Aaron, you're looking great. How do I go about getting those Bastani boulder shoulders? I don't really work out my shoulders, really. I don't really work out much anymore, full stop. When I did, if you want big shoulders, you want your lat front raise, use a plate, your side raises, your shrugs, your shoulder press, that's it. 4 exercises. And that's only cost you £5. What a bargain. I think we will call it there for the evening. Looking at your comments there. I think lots of people being very positive about the Greens. Some people feeling that Farage was treated unfairly. I honestly think it just wasn't a good format for him. And I think it was a mistake. Yes, I think we'll leave it there. we're going to wrap it up for tonight. We will, of course, next week be covering the general election on Thursday. Join us from 9:30 p.m. all the way through to 5 a.m. That's going to be Election Sesh 2024. You won't want to miss it. It's going to be our biggest and best stream yet. And of course, we'll be back on Monday for Novara Live, our weekly every night show from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. I'll be here in the chair again because Michael Walker is having the time of his life at Glastonbury. I don't mind. I'm not bitter. Can you tell? But for tonight, that's all. I'll see you again next week. Good night.